Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the webinar today. Today, we're going to talk about shared secrets to zero-touch production. Where are you on your cloud identity journey? In this next slide, I'm going to tell you a bit more about our format. Our speakers today are going to do this like a casual fireside chat, no pictures. The slides are going to be very minimal, and we're going to have a lot of ideas. So then there's not going to be death by PowerPoint here. Um, in your console, there'll be a section for you to ask questions. Please feel free to ask us questions and we will answer them to the end. And we're also recording the session. So if any chance you want to go back and refer to a certain part, we'll share this recording with you after the webinar is over. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers. Shashwat and Rami, I'll introduce Shashwat. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a bit more about yourself and the topics?
Thanks, Yaj. Hello, everyone. I'm Shashwat. I'm the founder and CEO here at P0 Security. Our mission is to help secure cloud access in all its shapes and forms. And this is something that I've been working on for the last almost 3 years. And it's a topic very near to and dear to me throughout my career. And with me is Rami McCarthy. Uh, Rami, quite honestly, no needs no introduction to everyone who's joining this chat. If you've ever been involved in any capacity as a practitioner in cloud security, you've probably seen or heard from Rami at various different forums, at Forward CloudSec, at industry conferences, in various different online communities. Um, he's currently obviously at Viz, but he's had a checkered career at places like Figma before that. Rami, you want to introduce yourself before we move on?
I don't know how I could top that very kind introduction, so I'll leave it there with only the good news.
All right. So today, why are we here? We all know that production access is messy, right? And it's interesting and informative to probably dive deeper into why it's messy. There are way too many identities in your production stack, right? Whether it's in the cloud, whether it's on-prem, whether it's hybrid. And these identities can come in many different shapes and forms. They could be obviously users or groups in your identity provider, or they could be service accounts, IAM roles, service principals, etc. These days they go by the quote unquote tag of non-human identities. And what this has meant is that there are way too many access paths to your sensitive data and your sensitive resources, and just too little shared context. And that means that the tools that we've been using historically, they don't really work well together to be able to secure uh, this complexity. Uh, but even stepping back for a second, right? What is it that we are trying to achieve? People say that zero standing privilege or quote unquote zero touch production is the goal, right? But many orgs are facing a number of challenges in reaching this goal. And today our idea will be, let's sketch out what those challenges look like. Now it's instructive to understand that not every organization's journey towards the ultimate goal of zero touch production is going to look the same, right? In our experience, having talked to hundreds if not thousands of customers over the last few years, and in our careers as practitioners in cloud security and generally infosec, what we have realized is that there are discrete paths and discrete phases of this journey, and it's very important to understand where you are as an organization and what it is that you need to do to move to your desired goal, which is the next step in this journey. And this is what we'll do today.
Yeah. And I think why we're so excited to talk about this is a lot of the writing, the discussions about access focus at a point on the line, right? You have organizations talking about, you have Google writing these really long research papers on some ideal that many of us will never reach. And then you have organizations talking about their specific journey or moment in time, but really pulling that together and acknowledging that there's a pretty clear shared escalatory maturity journey that we can dive into today is something that we hope is, valuable, not no matter where you are on this path, whether you're just starting out or whether you already see yourselves as mature. So can sort of tell you where you are in a peer benchmark, show you where you might go, what the risks will be in that process.
Absolutely. To give you a sneak peek of what we'll discuss over the next few minutes, uh, there are various discrete points starting at from one extreme, the wild, wild west, all the way down to zero touch production. Um, just to give you a snapshot, Wild West is obviously no governance, to put it mildly. And on the other extreme, there is zero touch production, which is the utopia that people dream of. But it's very important to appreciate that not everyone has the resources or even the desire or the business need to end up at phase 6. People rightly choose the phase that is most important for them, given their needs, given their business objectives, given their resources, etc. And it's okay to be at a phase 3, shooting for a phase 4, right? And the goal for today is to help you understand what these different phases are, what phase is relevant for you, why you might want to think about moving from one phase to the next, and what will that journey look like.
Yeah, and we say journey. It's not a linear unidirectional journey. Something I really wanted to bring into this conversation was the concept of backsliding on this journey. What's interesting about a lot of security is constantly fighting entropy. The universe moves towards chaos, and your security, your organization will move towards chaos as well if you let it. And so, as a security organization, identity is a domain where you have to constantly be investing, building invariance, working, and diagnosing to maintain your foothold. So, this isn't somewhere where if you've reached phase 3, you're guaranteed to be there forever because organizational growth, mergers and acquisitions, changing technologies, changing domains, all could really bring in more risk, bring in a little bit more chaos, and cause you to take a step back in your maturity journey. So we just want to emphasize that we'll be talking about building up your maturity, but we also hold space for the fact that folks may have previously seen a higher level of maturity and had to take a step back for various reasons. Or maybe we'll take this as an opportunity to realize that there's some investment needed, some work to be done just to maintain their current posture. It's not a guarantee that you'll stay where you are right now.
So, what does the very first phase, or should I say phase 0, the Wild West, look like? Um,
Yeah.
what does this mean to you, Rami?
Yeah, I think the Wild West is aptly named. Uh, you introduced this as no governance at all. I would say that this is, as our little infographic I think shows, is without an idea of governance. This is the very inaugural stage of norming and forming an organization. You can think about startups where when you start, it's the CEO's personal identities used in a lot of places. There's a problem in cloud called the underpants account, where in AWS, you used to be able to sign up using your Amazon retail account you would buy your underwear from. And then you have these multi-million dollar companies who are run out of an account tied to your CEO's Gmail. So this is before we even think about securing and managing our identity. And like we said, every phase has its moment in time. Ideally, you're not in the Wild West for very long, but when you're just getting started, or if you're a hobbyist, if this is the beginning of your journey, it's okay to acknowledge that right now we don't have a handle on things. It's rare that any meaningful business, though, can survive for long. You have these issues with how do you onboard people effectively, let alone the security side, just in terms of growing your company, growing your business? Without an understanding of access, it's going to be really hard to make people effective and productive quickly. And the same thing when employees leave, which they eventually will. Um, you have a lot of concerns about, what access are they taking with them? What access do they have that's irreplaceable? Do we have to call them to get back into some account? Um, the Wild West is a place where sort of this balance between speed and security, governance, structure, and pace and amount of autonomy has sort of lost any tension, and you're just fully in favor of speed. So this should be somewhere uncomfortable to exist, and that will be a little bit of a motivator to move forward. But generally, you start to move out of here when there's a clear moment of risk, right? Someone has a bad exit from the organization, is carrying really sensitive access. Or often it's when your first real audit comes in or your first big customer motivates you. I think, like Shashwat, is there any other sort of entry points or exit points from this you'd want to highlight?
No, I think you captured most of them correctly, right? For me, it's as you rightly pointed out, most startups with you know are probably start using the cloud in this stage. Some other um, symptoms of this stage are the fact that, hey, as you pointed out, you may have a CEO's personal Gmail or personal Amazon account in there, or you may not have your core, even if for the employees they are signing into to Amazon, to AWS using their personal Gmails. There's no concept of a single sign-on just yet. MFA be damned, right? Those are the sort of the symptoms which come to my mind when I think of the Wild Wild West. All right.
Awesome.
So, uh, what bri- uh, what brings us to phase one, which is the basics? In my mind, this is really just setting up the stage, doing the very bare minimum as far as security is concerned. So that includes things like SSO and MFA. But what do you think? What else is there in this stage?
Yeah, again, it's the basics because there's very little here. This is often the bare minimum to sort of meet an audit or meet a customer demand, or maybe just to give you a small sense of safety over access being managed, right? You don't necessarily govern access, but you start to centralize it. You bring in an IDP, you bring in SSO, you bring in MFA, although maybe not strong MFA. Maybe this is a phase where it's, text to personal phone numbers. On the cloud side, this is often where you start to think about the networking access. You've grown too big to have everyone with their IP allow listed for SSH or simply to put boxes on the edge. And so you either bring in, you're just starting to use a VPN, or maybe you're just starting to centralize your SSH access. And those aren't areas where you're doing any visibility or governance. So if you're doing SSH, you're not managing your keys, you're not rotating your keys. Keys are probably generated by employees whenever, wherever, and thrown on boxes. Um, Checkboxes are starting to get hit. Basic audits can probably be passed, but you're also accruing debt. You're pulling forward a little bit of efficiency and maturity here, but you're accepting right now that you're probably working out of an Excel spreadsheet for your access reviews. You're probably being a little loosey-goosey on onboarding, offboarding. It can take a week or two for people to get effective because the tribal knowledge of, oh, to get access to that system, you have to call Jim who manages the keys. And so I think that this is a phase that is dangerous, actually, because people can get stuck here. Like, you can tolerate a lot of discomfort if you normalize it for a long time in your organization. And so, for folks who haven't stopped to think about their access journey at their company at all, okay, we have SSO, we have MFA. Like, it's easy to feel like you're doing the right things, but when you look at the big picture, you're still carrying a lot of risk around these access patterns, around onboarding and offboarding. you're still carrying a lot of risk around the granularity of your access control. And culturally, you have accepted a lot of toil, a lot of friction. And so I think organizations, when they're lucky, start to move out of this because they realize that it's more expensive to stick here at scale, especially than it is to move further along on their journey.
Yeah, makes sense. And when I think about this stage, right, it's what makes people move from here is really just the understanding that, hey, security is a first class citizen. It usually comes in the form of some empowered security team coming into the organization, or if there is already one, they start looking seriously at how to secure the production access, right? But there was a point in there which you mentioned around the people getting serious about network connectivity level security, right? Which brings us to phase two. And phase two is really laying down the foundations of zero trust. And obviously, when people think about zero trust, the first thing that comes to mind is some kind of zero trust on the network side, ZTNA, right? Curious what this means to you.
Yeah, I think frankly, ZTNA is probably like full, like having a fully zero trust stack that can support internal apps over HTTP, can support chill access, your database access. That's going to be pushed a little further into the future on the maturity curve. But at phase two, we start to have an opinionated take on our networking and our identity into production. So it's the foundations because it is a concrete move towards your zero trust future, as it were, which means, you can start to have a single golden bastion if you're doing a bastion based approach. Or what I actually often see is organizations that will start having a identity aware proxy approach that only supports a couple protocols. Like this is where, okay, we have a lot of internal UIs. We'll expose those with an identity based proxy so that those are zero trust and all our SSH is still over the internet. It's a mix at this phase. And you're experimenting, but you know that eventually you want things to be zero trust. You just aren't in a place to do it in a comprehensive and rigorous way. This also is often very decentralized, and again, you still don't have full governance. So these initiatives may happen in a specific team. Often it's DevOps or platform who bring in these first concepts of zero trust just for the friction reduction versus there being any core initiative around, analyzing and building out a program of zero trust access. Um, I think this is also where you start to think about explicit access. This is really where you might be moving beyond everyone gets what they want when they ask for it to a model where there's actually a little bit of rigor to access. Uh, this is not, we'll talk soon about like who gets access to what when as a rigorous question, but right here is where you do have this idea emerging that not everyone should have access to everything. However, it ends up centralizing on a few broad roles. So in a cloud context, this means you'll start to see like we have a developer role and an admin role and maybe nothing else. And so you're starting to like get the picture that access should be broken out, but you're certainly not doing anything granular. You're not doing anything just in time quite yet. So you're spiky on your maturity. And it's worth, I think we sort of missed an opportunity to highlight this earlier, but maturity is not a set of checkboxes or like a table to fill out where you fill out the lines and the rows. Instead, it's a spider graph. So you can be really strong in some of the sub areas of one of these phases. You can be like, oh, we're doing WebAuthn for everything. You're really strong on MFA. And also all of our hosts are on the internet and, public. So
Yeah.
you can make your way through this process in a way that's a little more organic, a little more nuanced, then you can only consider yourself at phase two if you've done every checkbox of phase two and none of phase three and none of phase one. It's more granular than that for sure.
Makes sense. And that's actually a good segue to a few things that you were talking about, especially around least privilege. So what I've seen is that when people start putting the foundations of after they've started putting the foundations of zero trust in place, maybe they've put in a bastion server, a jump host, whatever you want to call that. The next step after that is ready to start imagining what entitlements and how to manage those entitlements at more finer grained level than just hey user access read only access and admin access, right? So I'll be curious to hear your thoughts around what this phase means.
Yeah. So I think this phase is where visibility starts to drive change. So in a lot of the previous phases, it is organic with growth, with a number of identities being tightly coupled to number of employees, and entitlements being so granular that it's like one, maybe two roles. The matrix gets really big here. When you start to get a little more granular, you then have a broader identity matrix, which means you start to bring in a tool like some sort of identity governance, identity visibility tool, and want to surface identity risks. So this is where you're starting to govern some of those basic primitives we talked about, like MFA, use of SSO. You're getting basic visibility there. You're um, doing a little more periodic access reviews. You're not at like immediate alerting of access deviations, but you've gotten enough in place that you can quarterly, annually think about access in a little more rigorous way. And huge fan of just-in-time access. This is where you look at your biggest access risks, so your super admins in production, and you sleep a little better at night by moving that access to not persist on the endpoint indefinitely.
Got
Um,
it.
I think that's some of the core points for me. Shashwat, anything else jump out to you here?
No, I think you covered most of them already, right? This is what this stage looks like. You start getting a handle on who has, at least from a user perspective, whether they have least privileged access or not. And this is probably where you're also using some, um, you know, fully some well-established ZTNA solution like a Zscaler or a Netscope or one of those. You've started to think beyond life with a bastion, and you're trying to manage everything as far as production access is concerned via entitlements, ideally least privileged entitlements.
Yeah, I think that's the friction point that we'll sort of touch on to jump off to this next phase is great, you're managing entitlements. Well done. Congratulations, you're managing entitlements. And eventually your security team starts to feel that pain.
Yeah.
I think as you go from three into four is this phase where security is trying to constantly create, manage entitlements, least privileged access, and you start to think about NHIs or as I prefer, machine identities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, by phase three, you've more or less got all your users under well-established governance processes, right? They hopefully don't have too much standing access, and they've moved on to a just-in-time production access model. Uh, it could be ideally it's super granular. Sometimes it's not, but that's okay. But the general point is you've done 80% of the work, 80 to 90% of the work on the user side. And this is when you realize that, hey, there is a big blind spot which you've not been paying attention to. Um, your auditors start thinking about it, you're questioning you about it, and it's I hate using the term non-human identities because it sounds a bit gimmicky. But at the end of the day, for me, non-human identities are all of these identities that are not IAM users, that are not linked directly to a human. They could be service accounts, service principals, IAM roles, break glass users. Um, and alongside them, there are these quote unquote non-human credentials, which are these static keys, API tokens, access tokens, any sort of a credential which any one of these identities could use. So my
Yeah.
question to
I
you,
think
how
credit to
does spirit
non-human
work? Yeah.
identity, it's a catchy term. You get immediately what it means. However, I think this idea that we're just discovering this problem is a bit funny. Like those of us who've been in the trenches of identity, have been worrying about service accounts forever. Uh, and also, there's this connection between human accounts and service accounts. Like when you have more developers, you tend to have commensurately more services and more service identities. When you think about least privilege, the mechanisms tend to be pretty similar between humans and identities. It's more a matter of pace and of scale. And so this phase equally applies to non-human identities and to organizations with really dynamic workforces, where it's just the point at which you need to think about life cycle ownership, delegation, management, governance rules. And then on the credential side, you just have enough credentials that statistically something's going to leak. You're going to have employees churning, and you need to start to think about short-lived credentials or at the very least automated secrets rotation. And as we said in earlier phases, focusing on your top risks, so non-human identity, focusing on what are those highly privileged services? Is that the right subset of your services to carry that sort of access? Are we able to generate that list at all? And like, how can we get better at having visibility into our non-human service identity? And starting to trim changes in a more scalable, sustainable way, heading into this next phase.
Absolutely. So once we've gotten the basics of NHIs under control, and by basics, I just mean that in the previous phase, for example, you have some visibility, you have some rotation of secrets, some bare minimum processes, right? Um, what else is there? What what else is there? What are the gaps around governing identities, be it human, be it non-human? The next step surely is some kind of automation. What do you think?
Yeah, I think automation, automation, automation. The only guy that can stop a bad robot with an identity is a good robot, right? Like this is the phase where once you've built that visibility, that understanding of your human and non-human identities, the scope is going to be pretty daunting, and you need to come up with these systemic ways to reduce your identity-related risks. An example here I would point to almost of like something that clearly lives in phase five is Netflix built RepoKid, which was a service that automatically least privileged service identities. And I like this example for two reasons. The first is that it's a example of the level of investment it takes at this phase to deal with a complex environment with a lot of service identities. Actually, three reasons I like this. Second reason, it's an old example. RepoKid's been around for years. As we're saying, this is not a new problem. This is not a new journey. It's one you can see repeated historically. And then finally, I like RepoKid because there's a dirty secret, which is that very few companies outside of Netflix ever adopted RepoKid. It was open source. It gets talked about in blog posts and conference talks. But it turns out this is a really hard, unique problem to many companies. And building a solution that can handle the rigors of the day to day in a way that's resilient, reliable, understandable is really hard. And so I'd say that this is the phase where you have to build and maintain complex systems. And that's a challenge because it's contextual access decisions. It is automated distribution and maintenance of short-lived access on machine services. It's automated least privilege of humans. It's management as code for visibility, compliance, governance, which means it's also drift detection. This is an area where you're really only going to get there with a substantial investment in build, with a lot of custom investment and organizational specific foo, or where you really need to think about whether what got us here will get us there from a product services adoption perspective. It's going to be pretty hard to govern your identities with some in the cloud with legacy players. And similarly, it's going to be hard to fit a traditional CSPM, which you've been using until this point to have visibility, into actually sort of doing this more nuanced and granular awareness from code to cloud. So this is the stage at which The stakes get really high because you can send your organization screeching to a halt if automation goes haywire. But it's also a phase where the human duct tape toil that can sustain you through the previous four stages, you can white knuckle it, really just completely falls apart. And we don't see any organizations making it comfortably into phase five without an automated approach.
Makes sense. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned RepoKid in there. It's probably one of my favorite OSS projects. Special shout out to our common friend Travis for
Yeah.
having come up with that. But I mean, you make the point pretty well that it's been around for a while, for like 7 years, probably longer. And
Have we solved non-human identity? We can go home? Yeah.
yeah, and it's and part of it is also because that while it solves a very important problem, it's it's further along the life cycle or the maturity curve for most organizations. So many organizations don't even come to anywhere close to using it because they're stuck in some of the previous levels, right? But moving on, right? This is probably the utopia for most companies, right? And when I define zero touch production, what it means to me is every access is short-lived by design. Every access is least privilege, and every access is passwordless. And by passwordless, I really just mean that there are no static credentials floating around. Users are using strong passwords, MFA, and service accounts or services are using some kind of federated, short-lived, certificate-based access. Um, and ideally, there are no humans touching production anywhere except for a well abstracted layer of SREs. So the million-dollar question: has anyone really gotten close to this utopian vision of zero-touch production?
So Google coined zero touch production. It's sort of adjacent to their Beyond Core writing and sharing. There's a great talk and conference paper on it. I very much believe Google that in some small part of their SRE organization they've implemented in practice. That's about it. It's very much an example of draw the rest of the owl too, because we could navel gaze like the details of how Google does this, but fundamentally, like step one, build Google. Step two, you can get zero touch production. What worked for them will not necessarily work for most organizations. So I will say that organizations can get close, and I think philosophically, zero touch production is in many ways an observability story. How do you avoid people needing touch production? Well, you build mediation, you build just-in-time access, but you also have to build ways for engineers to get their job done that doesn't involve touching production. And so I think what's powerful about this for me is security needs to take this whole organization approach as you pursue zero touch production to not just think about the security mechanisms, but really about how work gets done. And that's something that you can take back into past phases. When you start to touch your human identities, you can't do so in a way that stops the business from functioning or succeeding. And when you start to touch your non-human identities, you can't just take away permissions willy-nilly from production without understanding the implicated services. Security needs to be a first-class stakeholder. Security wants that right, that seat at the table, but that means they have to earn it by bringing an understanding of the complexity of these systems at scale. It's rare. I think we have some models to learn from, and we also have a lot of lessons that don't necessarily apply to elite security engineering teams at FANG, but may make more sense for your company at your scale at your moment in time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, just reiterating the point that we made earlier on, most companies may not even want to be here. It may not align with their business objectives. They may not have the resources. And this probably describes 99% of companies outside FANG, outside a very small portion of Silicon Valley, right? And you know what? That is okay. It's the idea of the journey to zero touch production is that progress is not linear. Everyone should know where they stand. Everyone should align with their business stakeholders. The single most important thing security can and should be doing, in my opinion at least, is aligning and enabling businesses rather than being seen as the team of no. right?
Yeah.
Once you do that, once you align with your businesses, figure out where you are and ask yourself, what is the next best step for my team? Where do you want to be? And if the answer is stage four is where you want to be, and if you're at stage two, that is okay. No one will give you extra brownie points for going all the way to stage five or six. But, but start off with your goal, understand where you want to be, and make clear who's accountable for each step and make it measurable and achievable. What do you think?
Yeah. I think, yeah, we're not here to shame anyone for where they are on their journey. Like, we're here to help you diagnose and progress. What I would say is have a really good answer for why, where we are and why, right? Like, it's perfectly defensible to say we're at phase one because we're a 10-person startup and we're not even default alive. Like, if we don't fix our business problems in the next 2 months, there won't be a company to secure. Great. However, if you say, I don't know what phase I'm at, and I don't know why, right? It's like I have no concrete philosophy. This is a really useful tool, we hope. And I think it's also, you know, knowing why but not where is hard, right? You can say we're very compliance driven. We protect healthcare data, and identity's good. Like that's not enough for me. I want you to have a better answer for yourself, for your customers, for your users, for your employees, and for your board. And similarly, saying we do zero touch production and not telling me why that makes sense for your business, right? Like I'm not going to assume that you're investing your security, time, and energy wisely. And that's what's all about. Security is here to make companies succeed, which means we're here to help you invest your time and energy in the ways that protect your users and achieve your business goals.
Absolutely. Uh, with that said, um, if anyone out here on the call wants to understand or try to identify which stage they are in, we've made this field guide available as a checkbox or in more detail on our website. Please feel free to download it. The link is there on your screen. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to talk about how we see the access security posture evolve and what customers should be doing at every step of the way, how they should think about the various trade-offs involved at every step, and most importantly, how they should be um, tactically implementing steps to move further to the right from where they are. And now I'd like to open it up to Q&A. Yaj, what do we got?
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we do have a few questions here. One question is someone saying that their team is one of the ones you mentioned earlier on, and they're just starting to think about JIT. How do you know when to start, when you're ready to start cutting back on standing access without also slowing things down? It was a two-part question.
Yeah. I guess I've done this in recent past roles, so I'll take the customer side and then we can pass it to Shashwat in case there's a perspective for him to share. Um, there are two metrics I would start to collect to understand my journey around just-in-time privileged access. Two very simple metrics. They're available downstream of any sort of IDP you're using, any SSO, which we hope you're at that phase, right? You can't really do just-in-time without SSO anyway. The first metric is density of admin access. So, what percent of my users, and again, this is very broad, this is not granular, what percent of my users have functional admin, right? Roughly what I would consider very privileged access. They can affect production, they can touch sensitive data or customer data. How dense is that? Is it 10% of my company? Is it 20? Is it 100? And then two, how often is that access used? The latter number is harder to get at, but this is where you can start to look at sessions on your Bastion hosts, take the week or so to figure out that data, and then take some conversations to decide how you feel about it. I think the biggest thing that comes out here is as soon as you start looking at density of admin access and admin usage, you get uncomfortable for a couple of reasons. You either have really dense admin access, no one's using anyway, great, just in time solves that problem. If no one's using it, it's easy to remove, really clear story. You have, or you have dense access people are using all the time. And generally, I think even business leaders get really uncomfortable when you can tie that to business value. So Google pursued zero touch production because some double-digit percent of all of their major incidents were caused by humans making mistakes in production. It's the classic problem, like anyone who's been a developer long enough has dropped the wrong database. Uh, Hopefully it was on some passion project and not something serious, but like that problem is really compelling. And I think often we blind ourselves to the extent of that sort of access. And so your job is not to draw a line in the sand as security. Your job is to bring the right data to have a nuanced conversation about whether we're comfortable with where we are. And I think focus on the admins because drawing a complicated matrix is really hard. And these like admin oriented metrics are actionable ones for you to drive a clear conversation with a variety of stakeholders.
All
Uh,
right, thank you.
very well put. Yeah, I mean, I love those two metrics. The number of developers with effective stand admin access, and I guess defining effective is quite interesting. And
It's okay if it's vibe based though. If you're early in this journey, right? It's about how you and your team feel as much as it's about anything else. And so it is okay that if you just decide like, hey, it's, here's a few shibboleths for what admin means.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Because it's going to take you a long time until you actually know who your shadow admins are.
yeah. Okay, what's next
Awesome.
question? Yeah.
So the next one, this is also a two-part. So this person says, phase five, it sounds tricky because you put automation in place, but now you're going to have to deal with drift, fragile policies, and stuff breaking. So what does good actually look like at this point?
Yeah. I'll do a short version now and let Shashwat think on a long version. Um, I would say good is focusing on verticals instead of horizontals when you come to automation. So as you build and roll out automation, don't think about automating identity governance as a single project because it's easy to get over your skis. The good approach here is to focus on classes of access, sensitive services, right? Maybe you focus narrowly on your cloud IAM, something that's pretty normal to manage as code versus getting into your Okta roles and groups as code. And consider human in the loop as a baby step towards automation. We talk about this a lot these days with AI, right? Like there's a lot of ways you can sort of put a band-aid over non-deterministic processes by having a human validate it. Automation can be a tool to superpower your humans, whether that automation is AI oriented or not. And it's okay to think about automation advances as human facilitating, not human replacing. Like if you can give me a 90% draft of my access review, solving the simple cases and let me, the human, deal with the complex ones, you've already really helped me scale myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very well put. You you can get very deep in the rabbit hole trying to automate everything in identity governance. So that probably should not even be your goal, automation for automation's sake. And instead, it's useful to ask yourself, what are my organization's biggest um, challenges? What am I truly looking to automate? Why am I looking to automate? Um, because trust me, there's a lot to automate, right? And I think the 80/20 rule is usually serves. I've seen it. The people who've done it best have usually stuck to the 80/20 rule. Go after the 80% of the governance challenges which take up most of the time, the 20% which take up 80% of the time, and try to automate those.
Right. Third question is the way you talk about ZSP, it sounds great in theory, but is it more for North Star or is it actually doable?
Yeah, I think it's very much a North Star. It is doable, but only for a handful of companies. It requires a tremendous amount of investment in security, both in tooling as well as in headcount, which in practice is outside the scope for 99% of the teams outside. Forget the Fortune 100, right? Outside Fang, it's just a pipe dream, right? And I think it's okay. It's a North Star, but it doesn't mean that it's completely useless, right? At the end of the day, we all need a North Star to guide us to where we want to get to, even if we don't have a straight path for getting there.
I would also uh take a slightly different framing on some of these. I totally agree it's a North Star and it's not right for everyone. However, it's not all or nothing proposition. You can have parts of your infrastructure that are zero touch. Like if you have a highly regulated environment, you can focus on that area. You don't have to do this all or nothing. And I would also say that just because something is impractical doesn't mean we shouldn't chase it. I think it's really empowering if you're working on identity to actually like doggedly pursue, find concrete blockers to getting here in your company and understand what they are instead of just saying, oh, we know we'll never get there and not realizing that you have some opportunities to really do something innovative, industry leading, providing value to your business that might be unique to your environment. Because you may find that there are places where you can actually go zero touch really easily because of business reasons. And I'd also say it's always achievable. If you just turn off production, no one's touching it, business is gone. But this is the balance we want to point to is these are always a crank you're turning on governance. And as a security team, you also need to make sure you're facilitating the business doing their job. Because if you pursue zero touch production at the expense of people fixing problems, you're not doing anyone any favors.
Right. And one other question is, would it be better to have a separate solution for PAM and NHI rather than using a single one for both NHI and human identities?
I'll, as someone without a vendor hat on, I'll come in swinging here first. Uh, if you have a legacy PAM that is not NHI aware, sure, you probably need an NHI specific tool. I fundamentally see these problems as deeply intertwined, though, and so I would always prefer a holistic platform. Like identity is a graph. You have your human identities who own service accounts, who have transitive access into service accounts. You have credentials that might be static but might give access to systems that possess just-in-time bearer access, right? It's a really intertwined graph. And so this idea that you can totally decouple them is going to duplicate some work. You may have to do it to account for product gaps, depending on what you're using, what you're building, what your situation is. I think a lot of these NHI companies came out of nowhere just because there was such a blind spot in legacy providers. However, I think the future looks much more like a holistic platform. And I also think that because I think these stories are intertwined. Well, we've talked about how it tends to be people address human risks first and then move on to service accounts. Um, I have also seen cases where those priorities aren't deployed in that order. And a unified platform can help you think about whether you should be tackling non-human or human identities at the gate.
Yeah, this is a question that because we understood at the outset we are not going to be promoting anyone, I'd like to decline this question. But for what it's worth, I fully agree with Rami's assessment. At the end of the day, this is not to say non-human identities are not a problem. They very much are, but they are a problem as part of a larger consolidated, privileged access platform.
Okay, great. Thank you. I thank you guys so much, Rami and Shashwat. We have a few more questions, but I want to be sensitive that we're actually a little bit over our time. So for those of you who have asked questions, Rami and Shashwat, perhaps we'll get back to those folks after. Um, and if any of you have any questions coming up now that you've heard some of the talks here, I know the email says sales@p0.dev, but I promise you if you email us there, we'll get back to you. And download our field guide. We also have a monthly demo session on Thursday, so please feel free to join us there. And thank you so much for joining us here today. And we will hopefully meet you again on the next webinar, and good luck on your journey.